Hello again. In my first video I came out guns blazing with a 52-minute debate between QAnon and Karl Marx. Check it out if you haven't already. As I was making that video, there was one very important question that I really wanted to talk about, but it just didn't fit anywhere in the structure of the debate. So as a quick follow-up to my original video, I'd like to take a moment to consider this question. Is the QAnon movement an aberration from American conservatism? Or is the QAnon movement a continuation of American conservatism? In the first camp, you'll probably find the likes of Mitt Romney and Susan Collins pontificating on values and principles and creating a better America for Americans or whatever, all while dismissing QAnon as a fringe internet conspiracy started on 4chan in 2017. On the other side, QAnon followers like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert will dismiss the old guard as corrupt political insiders. The Q supporters will then claim the title of the quote-unquote true conservatives. These two opposing groups will undoubtedly give rise to many cable news fights as the opinion gladiators gear up to do battle on 10-person panels or 15-person panels or whatever the hell they show on TV nowadays. I'd like to do something a little different here. Assuming you all understand the basics of QAnon, I'd like to take you back, all the way back to the 1950s for a brief but guided tour through the media of that time. True, the specific posts and predictions of QAnon didn't start appearing until 2017, but I think the basic building blocks of the QAnon worldview have been with American conservatives for decades now. These mainstream conservative views have simply ratcheted up under the presidency of Donald Trump. So grab some nickels and dimes for tonight's double feature, fill up your Buick Roadmaster with leaded gasoline, and forget about seatbelts, because tonight we're taking a trip back to when America was great. Granted, the MAGA slogan has always been a little vague about when exactly America was great and when we stopped being great, but I've always had the sense that MAGA referred to the halcyon days of the 1950s, a time when the United States really started to dominate the world with its military, financial, and cultural power. Order abroad was matched by order at home. But watch out! There is a danger lurking around the suburban homes and quaint town squares.
A flood tide of filth is engulfing our country in the form of newsstand obscenity and is threatening to pervert an entire generation of our American children.
I'd like to introduce you to our first film of the night, 1953's
Perversion for Profit.
The news reporter in this picture, George Putnam, will say many interesting things in his crusade against newsstand pornography. He'll start by describing in vivid detail the insidious plots of the media.
It is big business, profitable business, for the mercenary persons who produce it, and for its more than 800 distributors. Obscene literature is a $2 billion a year business. That's $2 billion.
The key points being that the media is controlled by an evil minority.
The nudity of these magazines is defended and foisted upon the people by a vociferous minority in our society.
Preys on underage children.
Through this salacious material, these abnormalities are corrupting the minds and the hearts of our children.
Has the power to turn children into sexual deviants.
He is even enticed to enter the world of homosexuals, lesbians, sadists, masochists, and other sex deviants.
Manufactures crime and disease.
As I said before, the most insidious feature of these publications is that they glorify crime and ridicule law and authority. Sex-mad magazines are helping to create criminals faster than we can build jails to house them. What these publications promote as fun has helped to increase the spread of venereal disease in this country. Reported syphilis has increased more than 300% in the last 5 years. The incidence of gonorrhea has been steadily rising.
And leads to overall moral decay.
The juvenile court judges, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, innumerable psychiatrists, sociologists, and psychologists attribute the moral decay among our people in very large part to the obscene and pornographic literature so prevalent in our society.
Widespread immorality thus weakens our ability to fight international communism.
This moral decay weakens our resistance to the onslaught of the communist masters of deceit.
And poses an existential threat to Western civilization.
They lack the moral standards and values of our Judeo-Christian heritage. They not only oppose the principles of that heritage, which has given us our rich institutions and laws, but they advocate their overthrow. This same type of rot and decay caused 16 of the 19 major civilizations to vanish from the earth.
Clearly, the media is a powerful villain that can only be defeated by even more powerful heroes. Those heroes will be God and the United States government, and these two are deeply connected. The thinking goes like this. Morality comes from the Christian God.
Our Constitution was written by men who put their trust in God.
The Founding Fathers created the United States to be a Christian nation
and founded a government based on His laws. These laws are on our side.
Thus, the role of government is to enact God's law on earth.
We must save our nation from decay and deliver our children from the horrors of perversion.
To defeat the villainous media machine, the forces of Christ must act swiftly and decisively. The solution will undoubtedly involve the police power of the state. Georgia's slogan is,
"The law is our weapon."
Here the forces of Christ will cleanse society through a police crackdown.
Report objectionable material to the police. Every arrest and prosecution, every conviction is a step in the education of the public to the solution of the problem,
thereby saving our children from the corrupting influence of the media elite. To summarize, let's put together all of the pieces from the top down. The Christian God is at the top. Always, no question. The Founding Fathers created this nation based on God's law. By implication, the U.S. government isn't there to just cater to whatever's popular among people at the moment. After all, newsstand pornography was very popular. If you think about people voting with their wallets, popularity isn't the issue. Instead, the government should be the chief executor of God's will. In this battle to fulfill God's law, the forces of Christ are being thwarted by an evil and corrupt media, a media that preys on children and perverts them into sexual deviance. This moral decay is not just a threat to our children, but a threat to our way of life. It weakens the national immune system to the forces of international communism, and it can bring about the complete downfall of Western civilization. What's the solution? To use the law as your weapon, to marshal the forces of government, especially the police, to purify society from the corrupting influence of the media. But don't worry, we won't be spending any more time at the newsstand. Our journey together will continue on to the movies. Movies were much better, of course, because the Hays Code meant that movies came pre-censored. Instead of the modern rating system, movies had to abide by the code, or else they wouldn't be shown in theaters. This ensured clean, wholesome fun for the whole family. Since we traveled back to the early years of the 1950s, we can still catch a double feature at the local theater, although these would steadily start to phase out over the decade. So buy your ticket and maybe some popcorn and soda. The usherette will escort you to a seat up front. If you're white, colored folks sit up in the balcony. Once settled in, the programming usually starts with a newsreel. You won't want to miss the news because there's a young senator from Wisconsin who's been alerting the nation to how the United States is being infiltrated from the inside by enemy forces.
Today, the most dangerous enemy agent is not so much concerned with the secret information about weapons as he is with infiltrating the necessary departments of the government and shaping and controlling the actions of our nation so that the enemy is progressively winning without even firing a single shot.
Notice how well Senator McCarthy's speeches fit over modern political footage.
Trumanism also, in effect, says to the head of a household, if you catch a criminal looting your safe, kidnapping your children, and attacking your wife, do not dare turn the spotlight on him, do not get rough with him, do not call the police, because if you do, the criminal will have you arrested for disturbing the peace. I realize, of course, the low ebb to which our honor has sunk over the past 20 years. Once a nation has allowed itself to be reduced to a state of whining, whimpering appeasement, the cost of regaining national honor may be very high. But it is time that we, the Republican Party, liquidate this blood-stained blunder of the Atchison-Truman regime. We promised the American people something different. It's up to us now to deliver, not next year, next month. Let us deliver now, my good friends. We must regain our national honor regardless of what it costs.
Once we've gone over the news, it's time for a cartoon. How about Albert in Blunderland? This classic cartoon showcases the horrors of state communism. For background, there was a time when socialists and communists liked to use nature metaphors to communicate their ideas. Ants were popular examples of collective cooperation and a rationally planned economy. So Albert in Blunderland features a hard-working auto mechanic being seduced by the idea of communism. But once Albert spends some time among the ants, he finally realizes how terrible communism really is. And you know it's evil because communism features rampant censorship, a brutal police force, and an authoritarian government willing to brutally execute all opposition. When our working-class hero finally awakes from his dream, he's so terrified by the thought of communism that he promptly beats the hell out of the effeminate intellectual who tried to explain the merits of a different economic system. After the cartoon, we come to the B-movie. These movies were typically science fiction or westerns, and they often relied on formulaic plots and stock characters. The Wild West towns full of drinking and gambling. Lawless frontiers where lynch mobs could form at a moment's notice and sheriffs could be gunned down by cattle rustlers. And who could possibly bring justice to the frontier? Why, none other than Ronald Reagan, and he's starring in the movie Law and Order. Of course, Reagan wishes he could leave public service behind. All he wants to do is work on his cattle ranch. But when the outlaws start running rampant, Reagan takes up the sheriff's badge, and he restores order to the town by punching people, shooting people, and upholding the sanctity of marriage. There's also a part after a sheriff gets shot where Reagan implements a sweeping gun control program and has the government seize all the firearms from the town. But then Reagan gets into an epic fistfight with the bad guy who eventually gets killed by horses. In the end, the good guys win, they get the girls, and the bad guys find out the meaning of justice. Finally, we get to the A-movie. If you want to see another Western, you could watch Shane. The mysterious drifter known only as Shane wanders into the conflict between Grangers and homesteaders. Shane sides with the all-American nuclear family in their quest to lay down stakes on the open range and fulfill their manifest destiny. But when the lawless cowboys start trouble, Shane reverts to his gunslinger ways and unleashes some frontier justice. Shane even finds time to give a keynote speech to the National Rifle Association.
A gun is a tool, Marion. No better, no worse than any other tool. An axe, a shovel, or anything. A gun is as good or as bad as the man using it. Remember that.
Best of all, he guns down a dirty northerner.
What have you heard, Shane?
I've heard that you're a low-down Yankee liar.
Prove it.
Of course, Westerns weren't the only movies. We've also got noirs like Pickup on South Street, a picture about a 3-time loser of a pickpocket who steals a lady's wallet on the subway. But here's the twist. Instead of money, the wallet contains top-secret government material that's being smuggled out by the commies. And you better believe Mother Russia wants those secrets, and she wants them bad. At first, the pickpocket can only think about the money.
If you refuse to cooperate, you'll be as guilty as the traitors that gave Stalin the A-bomb.
Are you waving a flag at me?
But country comes first, and the criminal underground of New York would rather work with the police than sell out their country to a bunch of dirty Reds.
You just talked yourself into an early grave. What else do you know?
What do I know about commies? Nothing. I know one thing. I just don't like them.
When the bodies start piling up, our pickpocket will have to punch the hell out of those commies to save the day. Naturally, he gets the girl at the end even though he's incredibly abusive towards her.
How many times you've been caught with your hand where it doesn't belong?
Pickup on South Street is okay, but an even better A-movie for tonight would be The Big Heat. The film opens with a dirty cop committing suicide. Poor guy just couldn't handle the corruption that had taken over the city. A city overrun by drinking, gambling, and loose women.
You're about as romantic as a pair of handcuffs.
The corrupt, decadent political elite do everything they can to keep the sheeple in their place.
Never get the people steamed up, they start doing things. Grand juries, election investigations, deportation proceedings.
All while the police sit around doing nothing.
You like this detail?
I do what I'm told.
That's what we're all supposed to do, isn't it?
That's when the straight-laced Sergeant Banyan starts asking too many questions that go too high up the food chain. In return, the gangsters brutally murder his wife. To get revenge, Banyan gives up his badge, but not his gun.
I'll have your badge and gun, now.
You can have it. Permanently.
I asked for your gun, too.
That doesn't belong to the department, it's mine. Bought and paid for.
After throwing out the rulebook, Banyan tears through the criminal underworld by punching gangsters, strangling gangsters, shooting at gangsters, and vigorously shaking the occasional elderly woman. In the world of noir, it's an eye for an eye. And the ends always justify the means. But no matter how bad things get, justice always triumphs, and order is restored. Well, that about wraps up this trip to the movies. As we all get back into the car and head home, we might turn on the radio to help us enjoy the nighttime drive. Of course, there's plenty of music, but if we're lucky, we might catch a recording of Dwight D. Eisenhower as he gives his address to the Freedoms Foundation at the Waldorf Astoria. The speech came as Ike was transitioning from Supreme Allied Commander to President of the United States. The war hero famously told these defenders of American freedom, quote, "In other words, our form of government has no sense unless it is founded in a deeply felt religious faith, and I don't care what it is." After a long drive, we arrive back in 2020, where everyone is trying to figure out QAnon. As far as I'm concerned, if you really want to understand QAnon and modern American conservatism, you need to take in a good old-fashioned late-night, double-feature picture show. Because it's easy to dismiss this or that Q post and prediction, but the fundamental building blocks of QAnon have been with American conservatives for a long time. God is the bedrock for morality, the divine right of presidents, the U.S. government's mission to execute God's will on earth, the necessity of extrajudicial violence to purify society, especially from the corrupt, decadent media elite who prey on and pervert our children, thus making us all susceptible to international communism and threatening our very way of life. Like any good sequel, the QAnon movement does all the same things, just bigger, louder, faster, more intense. But this time they aren't just watching it on the silver screen, this time they get to be in the supporting cast. Q sends everyone lines from the script, and each believer pieces together their role. They live the performance, and the performance is their life. At least until the cameras stop rolling. Unsponsored promotion. This channel doesn't have any sponsors, obviously. At the time of recording, I have 5 subscribers, so huddle up team, because I'd like to make an unsponsored promotion. This video could not be made without Gil Scott-Heron's song, B-Movie. It's a fantastic song from a legendary poet and musician, and it's possibly the single best explanation of the hyper-real for all of you Baudrillard fans out there. So go check out Gil Scott-Heron's song, B-Movie, off of the album Reflections.